Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the province of the mind. With me is Dr. John C. Lilly, a noted pioneer of mystical states and states of consciousness and also interspecies communication. Dr. Lilly is a former researcher with the National Institutes of Health, the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. He is the author of some 5 books on human-dolphin communication, including Lilly on Dolphins, Man and the Dolphin, The Mind of the Dolphin, Communication with Dolphins. He has written many books on deep inner exploration, including the deep self, the center of the cyclone, the dyadic cyclone, and the scientist. And he's particularly noted for programming and metaprogramming of the human biocomputer. In fact, he introduced that term, the biocomputer, into our language. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to be with you. I think it would be good to start with your famous maxim about what is true in the province of the mind. Could you begin by...
In the province of the mind, what one believes to be true either is true or becomes true within certain limits. These limits are to be found experimentally and experientially. When so found, these limits turn out to be further beliefs to be transcended. In the province of the mind, there are no limits. However, in the province of the body, there are definite limits not to be transcended.
You've probably devoted your whole life, and certainly many decades recently, to pushing to see, what really were the limits.
Right.
Going into new realities, taking on the belief systems of those realities, and then coming back to your basic working reality and challenging those beliefs, integrating those beliefs
right.
with your own. In your writings, you've explored almost every state of consciousness I could imagine, the various mystical levels of Satori, communication with extraterrestrials, communication with other species. You've established probably a more significant mapping of inner space than almost any other modern person, and I think we all owe a great debt to you for that.
But don't get stuck with those. I've abandoned all of them. It's impossible, because there are infinities within the mind.
I think that's the beauty of your work, is that you keep moving further and further and further out. In the center of the cyclone, you described a state, in fact, you had a whole system, virtually a quantitative system for mapping states of consciousness, and you talked about one that I found most fascinating, which you call +3, mega Satori. And in that state, you describe going so far out of your body, and even out of the physical universe, to the point of being at the level of essence in which the physical universe is created.
Right.
That almost seemed to me, in reading that book, like an ultimate state of consciousness, but I know you wrote about it some 15 years ago. How does it look to you now?
Well, there's one state beyond +3. That's +1. But you're not allowed to remember that. Once you go into it, you have union with God. That's the true yoga. And so you're non-human. So there's no way you can recount what happened. You have no way of saying it, because it's beyond language.
Yes.
All those states are beyond language. Language is a very poor instrument to express them.
You've described in some of your other writings language as being a film, a thin film that separates us from reality, really. As much as we try to use language to describe what we mean, it really puts barriers up.
Well, there's one use of language that's valid. That's the injunctive use, telling you how to do things. The descriptive one is very poor. And William James said it. The other world is separated from this one by the thinnest of screens. And I found that this screen is language. So you have to abandon it when you're going to these other realities.
In addition to +1 and +3, you've mapped out +6. That's a state of consciousness, as I recall, in which the mind can travel to any point in physical or non-physical space.
But you maintain your individuality.
That must be a basic mode of a psychic explorer. I gather from reading much of your work that you spent a great deal of time in +6.
Right, and in +12. +12 is the blissful idiot. You're in your body, you're right here and now, but everything is happy. There's gold dust particles in the air, everything is good.
You can feel energy moving in and out of the different psychic centers of the body.
And as a bird calls, you hear it echoing through the galaxy. But that's not much use, unless you can get another bliss near you in the same space.
But many of the mystical teachings warn against getting stuck in some of these realities.
I haven't been in any of them since that time.
Well, you also refer to in your mapping of states, I suppose, is +48, which is sort of a perfectly neutral state.
Right. +24 is the professional state of any discipline that you're involved in, where you're lost in the discipline. 48 is where you're communicating with everybody else. And then there are the minus states, but I don't go into those.
No, but at one point you wrote about the importance of going into the minus states and remaining perfectly aware, being conscious in those negative states, not trying to block out the negativity, and you described that, as I recall, as burning karma.
Yes. And then there's in the center of the cyclone, there's a chapter called A Guided Tour of Hell, which was minus 6. And that was awful. So I never had to go back to that. And I was never frightened again. I was totally terrified in that one.
I suppose it's what the Christian mystics sometimes refer to as the dark night of the soul.
Well, it was the dark night of my soul.
Perhaps this is a necessary part of everybody's journey, is to go through the epitome of terror.
Right. And, for instance, there's an Iranian psychiatrist and an American psychiatrist that put 100 patients in a mental hospital in Iran through what they feared most, on ketamine. And they all left the hospital. Now, I tried the same thing. Later, after I read that evening I took 150 milligrams of ketamine. And suddenly, the Earth Coincidence Control Office removed my penis and handed it to me. And I screamed in terror. My wife, Tony, came running in from the bedroom, and she said, "It's still attached." So I shouted at the ceiling, "Who's in charge up there, a bunch of crazy kids?" The answer came back, "Well, you had an unconscious fear, so we put you through it," just the way the Iranian psychiatrist did.
In the realm of the mind, in the province of the mind, we can face all of our fears.
Well, you may not be able to, but you should. Try it.
I often find in dreams, I mean, the things that would destroy the body in the realm of the mind don't.
That's right. The survival programs, as I found out earlier during neurophysiology, are built into the brain. The rewarding systems, euphoric systems, and so on, and the sexual systems, and then the painful, punishing, anger, and so on systems are all built in. And then you realize that the cerebral cortex has many, many paths to these systems and from these systems. You don't have to go through these states.
Yeah. Let's focus a little bit on some of the terms you defined a moment ago, or you mentioned ketamine. What is ketamine?
Ketamine is the most commonly used anesthetic for very young children and old people. And in the literature, the emergent symptoms are described. Emergence meaning coming out of the anesthetic. And some doctors don't like those emergent symptoms, so they won't use it. But others know what they are, so they just hold the hand of the patient and help them come out. It was the most commonly used anesthetic in Vietnam. Some places won't use it at all. But they're frightened of it.
Basically what a strong dose of ketamine will do is make you unaware of your body.
Yes, it can. I don't like it anymore.
But it creates a state where one can enter into inner realities free from the attachments of the body.
Echo told me to stop using it and get back here and learn how to be human.
Well, in your book, The Scientist, you describe going through a period of very intensive explorations with vitamin K. You described it at that point to the extent that people thought, and it's not clear to me whether you were or were not addicted to the substance.
Well, when one's doing research on a substance, one takes it so frequently that outside observers can say you're addicted, but that's a very bad definition of addiction.
I think in many ways, whether you were or weren't, one has to admire your willingness to always push the frontiers of our knowledge further, and it's clear that that was your motivation for the work that you did.
Any good research is obsessive and compulsive.
You also mentioned the term echo. What is echo?
ECCO. In Italian, it means this is it. But it means to me the Earth Coincidence Control Office, which is one of God's field offices. And echo runs our lives, though we won't admit it. And if you're an echo agent, you can be very, very careful to use your best intelligence in echo service, and you realize there are no discoveries, there are only revelations. And that was a come down for the scientist, me as a scientist.
Well, I've found in my own work on the media and in parapsychology that I'm very much guided by coincidences.
Right.
And I guess it's looking to coincidences as signs along the way that defines this relationship with what you've defined as echo.
Right. The Earth Coincidence Control. It's coincidence control what they do. And they say we control the long-term coincidences, you control the short-term ones, and when you find out how we do the long-term ones, you no longer have to remain on Earth, you don't have to return there.
It seems to me as if your concept of echo is a way of modeling perhaps a mechanism behind what Jung has defined as synchronicity.
That's right. Jung defined synchronicity only in a good fashion in his introduction to I Ching. And he uses the term coincidences.
Meaningful coincidence.
Yeah. But of course, the coincidences are in your own construction, your own language construction of the events. So that's all a fake too. As I said at the beginning of my workshops, everything I say here is a lie. Bullshit, in other words. Because anything that you put in words is not experience, is not the experiment. It's a representation, a misrepresentation.
And yet here we are misrepresenting to each other in order that we can learn from these lies.
Right. Now, if you use language injunctively as a set of directions, then it's not as bad as it is otherwise.
So, in other words, for example, when you talk about echo, when you talk about perhaps going into an inner reality using a sensory isolation tank, which is one of the other technologies in which you pioneered, or
1954 I invented it.
Or using a number of different molecules which can be used for this purpose, or mystical disciplines. When one enters into these realities, each set of instructions carries with it usually a belief system.
Right.
And basically what you're saying is that all of these belief systems are wrong, but one needs to entertain or to hold the belief system in order to follow through the instructions.
That's right. Our brains are so small we have to do this.
So the belief system itself becomes a tool that we work with, and then eventually we have to let go of.
Right.
And using these belief systems, you've been able to, in effect, map out the inner terrain of inner space in a manner which has as rich and varied flora and fauna and geography as one would find on any continent, perhaps richer.
But if you take the same kinds of trips, you'll find a different flora and fauna. Different continents.
Each time.
Yeah. Right. So in the province of the mind, there are no limits.
And yet, if one pushes that very, very far, I guess no limits almost means nothing. There's nothing there. Limits is what defines things. It's what creates form. Does it?
I haven't thought of it that way.
Uh-huh.
Well, there are no limits that you put on it previously, and new limits may appear, which define it in an entirely new way, which is much larger.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that means.
I almost have the sense, though, that if there are no limits in the province of the mind, that we humans and other beings, we create limits of our own to make it interesting, to make the game worth playing.
Well, you can't live as a human without limits.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your body.
Yeah.
They're built into your brain, the pattern recognition systems in your brain, for instance. If one hallucinates, say on cocaine, one sees a bush over there as an old lady crying with a shawl over her head, and you walk over and it's a bush. Now if somebody else looks at, and they're under cocaine, looks at that same bush, they'll see the old lady with the crying. So this apparently is belief pattern recognition systems that are built into our brains,
Mm-hmm.
are given at birth, probably.
In other words, in certain altered states of consciousness, there is an ability, I suppose, to be telepathic, to cognize the thoughts directly of another person.
I think it's more than that. It's the particularly noisy pattern of the bush in striking your brain is reorganized,
Mm-hmm.
personified by the brain. And all brains do the same thing, even if you're not in mental telepathic communication. So you have an alternate there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know about alternity?
Alternity, that's a wonderful word. No.
I experienced alternity very dramatically when I came back from Chile.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat in Elizabeth Campbell's living room in Los Angeles, and in what I call the prophet meditation, sitting on the floor, and my spine ramrod straight, and suddenly a line of light comes down through my spine, and there are leaves of different realities all around me. And I could look into the future, and the present is right here in each of those, and it goes on out to many years from now, and goes to infinity upwards. And this tremendous amount of power going through this. Well, the next morning I was thrown out of bed by the Silmar earthquake. And I thought, gee, did I cause that? Or was that caused by the same energy that went through me?
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized that this was hubris. He whom the gods would destroy, he gives hubris.
They first fill with pride.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Right. And so I lost my pride, and I realized that I couldn't explain either of them.
Mm-hmm. But alternity, as you've described it, then, would seem to be a space in which you're in touch with many alternate realities,
Yes.
all
Yes.
simultaneously.
And then you get caught with one,
Mm-hmm.
as I did.
It seems very similar in a way to what physicists are describing when they talk about the multiple universe interpretation of
That's right.
quantum physics.
That's right. And Francis Jeffers is writing my biography, and he describes alternity from the wave function of quantum mechanics, and when you collapse it, you've chosen one alternate in the future.
You've referred several times now to the fact that in the province of the body there are limits, and you yourself have thrown yourself up against those limits on many occasions and have written about it.
Mm-hmm.
In your writing you seem to be warning people maybe not to do everything that you've done.
That's right. They don't have to. See this hand? I have to keep it in ointment because 11/11/87, I drove my car up a slight bank, turned it over, and totaled it. And this was the battery acid burned his hand. Mm-hmm. And these knuckles were broken, and that's all. If I had had my seatbelt on, I would have been decapitated. But Echo was showing me something, that I wasn't exploring alternates properly. I was caught with one.
There's a wonderful section in your book, The Scientist, in which you describe a conversation amongst different beings in an altered
Right.
state who are describing how carefully they work to create all the coincidences so that you could have an accident in which you nearly died
Right.
and were resuscitated by your wife, Tony, who had just learned mouth-to-mouth resuscitation 3 days earlier.
Right. Then the other accident, the one that closed off Vitamin K from me, where I was on a 10-speed bicycle going down Decker Canyon Road, and the chain caught, and I hit the road, and 9 bones were broken. But I didn't say to the scientist that I was on PCP at the time, 42 milligrams injected. And so I was out in the hospital for 5 days and 5 nights, and was taken by echo to planets that were being destroyed by supernova waves, by atomic warfare, and so on. It's incredible. And I'd try to come back here. I'd come back and Tony would be there, and I'd grab onto her and hold on for 6 solid hours. And then they'd take me back out. I hadn't finished the lessons.
What do you think the lesson is?
Well, the lesson in that case was look up the dose for PCP before you take any. It's 2 milligrams, not 42. And the other lessons, of course, were I came back and wanted to put on radiation suits, so on. That this planet is not very stable. It can be destroyed at any time.
There's a sense in, you know, the way in which you live your life right out on the very edge of what would be called not just normalcy or the edge of what is conventionally safe to do, but the very edge of what is physically possible for a human being to do.
Exploring the limits of the body.
Yes. And that in so doing, well, of course, you've discovered that, like the Fool and the Tarot deck, you put yourself into this position of nascent wisdom in which you're bound to make mistakes. One can't explore the way you have without making mistakes, and yet those very mistakes seem to propel you even deeper.
I have a saying, there are no mistakes, there are only correctable errors. There are no errors, there are only alternate programs. And that is, they didn't escape the guilt.
There is a sense in which, you know, you've lived your life so much on the internal reality that I almost feel like, you know, you being with me here in a TV studio, it's like you've come up for air a little bit to breathe together with us and to share what it's like in these vast, vast realms, light years away from planet-side reality.
I call that insanity. And when we're talking together, we're in outsanity. And you should never try to express all of your insanity in the outsanity, or they'll lock you up.
But you've, in a way, you've expressed more of your insanity than most people would ever dare to.
Well, a lot of people take my work as, my books as a permission to go further with that.
One would almost think that, you know, an entire generation, perhaps several generations of people now feel much freer to describe their own inner experiences because of people like you doing it at a time when it was much riskier.
I'm always surprised at how many people have read my books and been influenced by them.
Well, I can certainly say that that's the case for me.
I think you'll like the new edition of The Scientist. It has all the things I left out of the first one, 75 new pages and 50 new photographs and so on. And I admit that it was ketamine, not vitamin K.
But you're not using ketamine currently?
No. I don't like it anymore.
Are you still doing work in sensory isolation?
Once in a while. But I never talk about what I'm doing currently. Remember the human biocomputer?
Yes.
I was doing that work with LSD in the tank in St. Thomas, and the National Institute of Mental Health, on which I had a fellowship, thought I was just working with dolphins. So when I sent them the human biocomputer as the report for 5 years of a fellowship, they wrote back, we didn't realize we were going to get a monograph from this work. I don't think they read it.
And they cut off your funding shortly thereafter, didn't they?
Yes, somebody told the people supporting the dolphin research that I had brain damage from LSD. Well, I took that, I got that rumor, and so I took it to the head of the mental health council who was supporting the work, and he was the head of the Neurological Institute in New York, and he got angry when he said that. So he spent 3 days examining me. I've never had such a thorough examination. He got angry and angry. He said, there's absolutely no evidence. He said, do you want any more research money? I said, no, I've quit that. So he said, all right, I'm going to fire 2 people, one in the institute and one on my committee. So he did.
Well, I suppose for our culture, the really special thing about you is the fact that you really have a foot in both worlds, the scientific
Right.
camp and the mystical camp. And in a way, you seem dissatisfied with both of them. Neither camp seems to provide an adequate enough model
That's right.
of reality for you.
My own beliefs are unbelievable.
And you seem to be saying that it's up to each person to in effect, make the same bridge that you have and to create their own belief system so that in creating that belief, they can move into the state that that belief leads them to so that they can then discard it again.
That's the Gnostic point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Self-transcendence, not transcendence through a church or a group.
Back 15 years ago or so, you were exploring the mystical states, is described classically as the various levels of samadhi, in your work with Oscar Ichazo in Chile, in the Eureka School.
Right.
And you had achieved, as we had described earlier, some of the very highest states of those mystical traditions, and you wrote about them from your own personal experience. People in the mystical traditions view these states as being ultimate states. I get the sense from you that you don't think of them that way. You think of them more the way a scientist would look at tools.
Well, Patanjali, for instance, 400 BC, said when you reach the highest form of samadhi, you realize there are hundreds and more beyond that. And I agree. There's no limit.
Mm-hmm. Well, John Lilly, it's been a pleasure having you with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. You sure do know how to ask the right questions.
All right. And thank you very much for being with us.